Mm.
Hello and welcome to episode 59 of the Dashforce Free Amigos podcast. I'm Mark Mason and I'm joined by my two fellow Dashforce Amigos, Joel Valenzuela. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Excellent. And Brian, aka Mastermind. How's it going?
Good.
And Ryan Taylor, the Dashcore Group CEO, first time ever on the Dashforce Free Amigos podcast. How are you, Ryan? Are you well?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for coming on. It is much appreciated. There's a lot of excitement in the community for this, and we've had so many questions come in. So we're going to try and be as direct and get through as many as the community's questions as possible. And we actually had to create a Google Docs list because there were so many, and we've tried to separate them into different areas such as regulation, core development, etc., etc. Anyway, we don't want to waste any more time. Let's get into it. So. Joel, would you like to kick it off with the first question?
No, I would. Well, actually, yes, I would like to do one.
All right.
How's the weather there in Phoenix today?
Well, like every day in July, it's hot. It's currently 108 degrees.
108 Fahrenheit.
But yeah, I think yesterday it got up to 113, 116. Feels like. So it can get a little bit brutal. I think Glenn is wondering why he moved here from New York, but
yeah,
right about now. But we'll get him through summer, and then he'll appreciate the weather.
Right,
I'm guessing that as well. I definitely I used to live in Phoenix, and there was a couple times when I didn't have a car, and it was a little brutal, especially when you get the 118 days, and there's about to be a rainstorm, and then humidity goes up too at that level, and a little rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it true that your favorite color is Dash Blue?
It may be. Yeah. I like blue. Has always been my favorite color. Maybe it's one of the reasons I got into Dash in the first place. But yeah, I wear it a lot. I have on Dash Blue shoes right now. So.
Oh, look at those. That's it. Keep it dashy.
Taylors.
Yep. So yeah, I wear it a lot. I get teased a little bit, but I really like the color, and now I have even more of a reason to wear it. So
okay, well, I'm going to kick off the questions, and it's a topic that I'm really interested to learn more about. So Ryan, I am interested in Dash Ventures as it likely will be a game changer in terms of the value of Dash from an investor standpoint. What is the status of the legal work and an estimated time frame for Dash Ventures to launch? In broad terms, i.e. the next year, 5 years. Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, so the original estimate for Dash Ventures was sometime in Q3 that the lawyers estimated that they would be able to complete it. That was pending getting local review within Cayman Islands, which is the jurisdiction that we determined on a global basis would fit the objectives for that most closely. As we've engaged with local counsel in Cayman, there has been some feedback that the structure that we thought would work had a few downsides that we weren't aware of. But the good news there is they said that there were some structures that would meet all of the objectives, and it just required a little bit of tweaking. Now, I have asked the question, how does that affect that timeline? Does it push it into Q4 or not? And the answer was, we need to go back and get an assessment from local counsel on that. So that's the latest update I have on it. Is currently what I've heard is Q3, but there may be a delay if we have to do this additional work to restructure it a bit. And so I wouldn't anticipate years. This is 1 or 2 quarters away, probably at the most. I would actually be surprised if this pushed it out, beyond Q4. So I would say late this quarter or possibly Q4 is my best guess at this point.
And what exactly is Dash Ventures?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, Dash Ventures is a new legal entity that we are creating that will, for practical purposes, be owned by the Masternode network in order to facilitate new types of investments. Right now, the Dash protocol really only allows for grants. These are essentially gifts to companies that are attempting to start up or attempting to integrate Dash or do something that will benefit the ecosystem. And that really works really well when what you're buying is a set of services or something like that. But when you're actually investing in a partner, in the real world, what ends up happening is very different structures depending on the level of risk. And so grants are great for established businesses that are just looking for money to integrate Dash. What it doesn't work so well for is very high risk ventures where we're putting in money and there's no certainty that the business itself will even succeed. And in cases like that, in the real world, what people do is they take something in return, equity, or they make it a loan. It's not necessarily a gift. And so I think that the creation of an entity that's capable of making investments on behalf of the network opens up a whole new world of possibility. No longer is it necessarily absurd that someone is coming to us and looking for all of their startup capital if the network is getting a new income stream in return. And so I think it will make the open up a new world of possibilities for how the masternodes can grow the network and grow the ecosystem of services that surround the network. It also will diversify our income streams beyond just direct transaction fees, but other income sources as well. And I think that it will also have some side benefits, like providing coin price stability. And I can explain a little bit about how that might occur. And so I think there are multiple benefits to the network. It makes a ton of sense to spin something like this up. Once it's set up, this entity will, have its own operating expenses, its own management team. It will have a different structure surrounding it than Dash Core Group does because the requirements are very different. We want to be able to return, some of that money back to the network. And that's not something that Dash Core Group is set up well to be able to do. So it's a really interesting concept. I think it will add value, as people have said, to the network. I think it's going to be really novel within the space that networks can actually own something. And it does away with the argument that it's not backed by anything.
How would that work technically? That's the big thing I'm thinking about is right now it's pretty easy about how everything in the DAO gets funded because, just on the blockchain, stuff gets created in the Superblock and there you go. But like, how would masternodes, for example, get their rewards through a bunch of companies? Like, how would the technical process of that happen? Would it all be sent to a centralized fund where do you trust someone to disperse it with proof of your masternode keys, or is there something more polished in the works, or do we just not know yet?
So it's actually incredibly rudimentary, right? This is not rocket science. In order to take legal ownership in something, you need a legal structure. So that's what Dash Ventures will be. Funding Dash Ventures can happen one of several different ways. The masternodes could vote to just simply allocate capital to it. And say, hey, go invest this on our behalf in conjunction with your mission. Option 2 is directly vote on a specific funding opportunity and say, hey, this company has come to us. They're going to offer us 10% equity in their company, and this is what they're looking for. In which case, Dash Ventures could enter into a legal contract with this company that says, if the network funds your proposal, you will issue 10% of your shares to us, and can verify to the network that that legal contract has been entered into, and the network can essentially directly fund something specific. A third way that this could be done is Dash Ventures could engage in a contract with a company that says, we will make a loan or make some investment in your company. The amount in fiat is to be determined, and we will jointly put a proposal up to the network for this. If the network approves it, those funds are distributed to Dash ventures with a specific mandate attached to them from the masternodes that it be loaned out to this company. Could be liquidated to fiat. It could be sent to them in a specific amount of Dash. And whatever that amount is in US dollars or something else, they would pay back that loan over a period of time at some interest rate. So that's how the mechanism can work to get the money out to assets that the network wishes to invest in. In terms of the returns coming back to the network, that can either be reinvested or it can be distributed to the masternodes using some method. And one of those methods could be based on the service that the masternodes are providing back to the network. So it could be on the basis of uptime or some other metric that would strengthen the network. What you don't want to do is distribute money back specifically as a dividend, because in almost all jurisdictions, that requires the masternodes to self-identify in order to be eligible for that dividend. In order to retain this as self-reported income and do away with that administrative burden, it needs to be a payment for service. And so in order for that to happen, it needs to be tied to some metric. We can use uptime as an example. That would also serve to incentivize the masternodes to create redundancy and strengthen the hardware that they're using and so on, in order to ensure that their uptime is as high as possible. So it can actually improve the services that the network provides to users. And so there are ways to make distributions to the masternodes in a way that is not directly tied to the investment income in any given period, and is instead tied to service, some service metric that makes this self-reported income. And the only information you need is the deterministic masternode list that says, here's the list of masternodes, and you can verify that those distributions went to those masternodes in proportions to their uptime or some other metric.
So another thought on that. What if all the rewards from various investments will be put towards like a treasury sort of system? Because obviously long term, the block reward is going to run out, and there won't be something to necessarily fund development or anything else. Would that be another alternative thing, is just pull it into another treasury type system that then a masternodes could then vote on what happens to it?
I mean, the beauty of the governance system that we have is we can vote on any type of mechanism change that we want collectively as a group. All it takes is someone to take a leadership position and say, hey, here's something that I think could improve the system, rally support for that, and hold a vote. And so I think the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. Anything is really feasible in something like this. And in fact, I would venture to say you don't want one Dash Ventures. You want Dash Ventures 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And the reason you want that is you want competitive pressure between different entities to do the best job possible on behalf of the network. Number two, I would say they can have different mandates. Dash Ventures number 1 can have the mandate of highest possible return on assets. It doesn't matter where they invest. They can invest in the Indonesian stock market if they want to, right? But their objective is to get as high a return for the masternodes as possible. Objective number 2 could be, hey, we want to explicitly grow the services on the Dash network, and specifically return on investment matters less. Our primary objective is to see new services be added to the network and add utility. A third one could actually be, hey, we want to make investments and have the proceeds go towards Dash-approved charities. So there's a number of different ways that the network can benefit from these things and can provide benefits to others. And so I think it's really up to the masternodes to decide what types of entities they choose to fund, what they value, and have different entities compete for this. Now, at our current scale, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to incur the legal expenses to spin up 5 of these. Let's spin up the one, prove the concept, and if there is sufficient funding next year, let's create Dash Ventures #2 or something else. And so, I think that this is a model. It isn't necessarily the perfect model, but it is the first one. And in similar ways to how Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, it's not going to be the only way to do it. And so, I encourage that the masternodes engage in this process, and then, let's see what we can do with it. I believe there's tremendous value here.
Yeah. I think it can be huge. I hope it can also be retroactively applied to like an Alt36, something like that, because I'm sure they'll be coming back for funding, or I don't know. What is the status of Alt36?
So Alt36, I think it's well known at this point. They stood up their product in May for the first time and announced their first integration. And in June announced a second integration, which is one we already knew about that was happening, CanTrade. They also have announced that their first state license has come through, Arizona. Now, they have state licensing underway in other states as well. The Arizona one came through very quickly, in part because of the relationships that they have here. That was very much expedited process. So I think one of the issues with Alt36 right now is just a matter of timing. Their first 2 integrations primarily and almost exclusively have customers in California. Their first license came through in Arizona. Now, these are things that are outside of their control. But that pretty much makes it very difficult for them to get real-world deployments right now. When the California license comes through, I think it would open up much more selling opportunity to them. As things stand, these 2 companies, CanTrade, and I think it's I forget the name of the other one, WebJoint. Can sell into new dispensaries in Arizona, but that's as new business comes. So it'll be a trickle in right now as they add dispensaries. I am aware that there are a number of other integrations that are underway, but not yet announced. So I think the progress is steady. They launched the product less than 2 months ago. And I think when licensing starts to come through in larger numbers in more states, and especially in states where they have integrations in place, that's when you'll start to see the first, dispensaries where you're going to be able to find, be able to purchase with Dash. On other fronts, they have done a couple of fundraising rounds outside of Dash, and so they've managed to attract investors, and I think that is a very good sign. And the investors, by the way, many of them are strategic in nature, and so I think that is real buy-in from the industry that Alt36 has a real solution.
Okay.
Do you know if there's any of the ATMs set up yet in Arizona? I guess that's still in the plans. They got the license. I guess that's the same license for the ATMs.
I have seen a demo unit. They're beautiful. They look like an Apple product. I think when the community sees them, they're going to be pretty blown away. They have not been set up in any dispensaries yet, to my knowledge, but my last update is several weeks old. So I don't have a concrete answer for you there, but I do know that they're operational, and I've seen a demo unit.
Is it Lamasu? Is that who it's through?
I don't know if that's been publicly disclosed who the manufacturer is, but it is a new model.
Okay. I just want to get through as many of the questions that we received through Masternodes as possible, because we had a lot of questions. So two-part question. Will we see Dash Evolution in 2018? And when can we expect to see an updated roadmap?
Yes. So let's start with the roadmap issue, because I know that it's been an issue with the community and with Masternode owners. The roadmap that was created, I believe, back in early 2016, was one that was community-wide. It wasn't exclusively what Dash Core Group is working on, and in fact predated the creation of Dash Core Group. It included things that were, things that Evan wanted to do, or other community members that were participating as part of the team wanted to do. These include some things that are now in Dash Ventures, and or with community members that are not a part of Dash Core Group. And so it was a bit of a roadmap for Dash overall. It wasn't really a specific to the items that we're working on. Item number 2 is that that roadmap was created at a time when we had not yet done due diligence on whether these ideas or technologies would work, how they would be implemented, how they would integrate with each other. And I think that I would view that more as a framework for what some of the leaders of the project wanted to see happen. Fast forward to today, we haven't updated that. And we haven't, you look at it today, it's obviously out of date. There are some things that are in that roadmap that are very long-term goals, and other things that are short-term goals. And so I think that it became woefully outdated. I think it became a real issue a couple months back as the end dates associated with that roadmap started to approach, and community members started pointing out, to us that that's obviously not what is happening. So can you update us? We have been working on a new roadmap for a couple of months. It is nearly ready to publish. I was actually hoping to get that out prior to today, because we've had this scheduled for some time. I think it will be out by the time we host our quarterly call. So that will be when I think the community gets a really good view into what the roadmap looks like from here. What I can tell you is on there, 12.3 was a big component. 12.4 is the last major upgrade to the network that's needed before the release of version 13, also known as Evolution. And they're really, beyond version 12.4, there really are not a lot of components that are left to create for version 13. There are usernames that need to be built in. The these new transaction types that we're incorporating need to be included, and a couple other minor components, but we're getting close to the end. What I would say is there's been a lot of discussion about what is included in Evolution over the years. Not all of that is part of an initial release. We've, previously Evan has put out his version of the roadmap that included items that, went out to 2020. What the community needs to understand is not everything will be included in this initial release. And so beyond that roadmap that we publish in the coming weeks, we are going to be publishing a longer term roadmap that spells out some of the items for next year, and then some of the items on the longer term wish list. What will be in the initial release will be the ability to create a username, the ability to friend people, the ability to request a payment, make a payment, and transact with data attached to that transaction that is stored in the masternodes. Those are the items and capabilities that will be available. It will look and feel a lot like Venmo. Other items may not be necessary for MVP. And our new CTO, Bob, he's amazing. We are incredibly lucky to have him, and I can't wait for the community to meet him. We should have him on the podcast at some point soon. He's gotten
open
his
invite
footing.
always.
Yeah, he's gotten his footing very quickly. He's probably upset that I just signed him up to that. But he's been getting his footing very, very quickly, both in the technology and in how the team is functioning. He is doing an excellent job of identifying and stripping away the unnecessary and getting the team incredibly focused on what really matters, what delivers value, how do those things come together? How are we actually going to, move from where we are right now to closing on the delivery of 12, of version 13. And he is a CTO that has a strong track record of delivery. You go back and look at this guy's history. He has done this time and time again. And I think when you meet him, when the community meets him, just hearing him talk about the way that he thinks and the way that this team is set up and the way that he's going to deliver, it's very confidence instilling. And so we've really upgraded there in terms of the capabilities of the team, and it's having an immediate impact. And so I think that I think when he publishes something, he's sure he's going to deliver on it.
So just
he's going to be on the he's going to be on the call, right? The quarterly call.
Yes,
cool. Yeah.
He'll be on the quarterly call.
And when is that? Do we have a date?
Well, we haven't set a date yet. We've been playing around with a couple of dates internally in making sure that everyone can be ready for that call. We typically hold these around the end of the month or the beginning of the following month, following a quarter. So I would expect it around the end of July or beginning of August.
So I just want to be crystal clear. So that first iteration of Dash Evolution you was just talking about, that will be released in 2018?
We do not have commitment from absolutely everyone on the team yet, but I do not see any indication that it would spill over into 2019 for any reason.
Okay.
Based on I don't want to say that concretely before absolutely everyone who has to deliver has attached their name to that. But I don't see a reason why it wouldn't.
When would we know? When would they know? By the quarterly call if everybody's going to line up, or
the roadmap will be announced by the quarter. Probably on the quarterly call. To be honest, if we get close to the quarterly call, it makes sense just to release it at that point.
Yeah, one thing on the roadmap that it is very long term, something I've really been excited about, and everybody else is. We have a lot of questions about it. That is the Masternode shares. I'm guessing that's going to be further on down the line.
Yeah, it isn't consumer facing. We are focused much more on consumer facing topics. Masternode shares are something that can provide some benefit, particularly to users that want to lock away Dash for a period of time and receive some rewards for that and help diversify the ownership of the Masternode network. So there is some security and diversification benefits to it in comparison to delivering a great user experience and new features and functionality. I think there's no question where our priority ought to be. And so I think that that's one of those topic items that if I had infinite resources and, the budget were enormous and we had the ability to do all of the things we wanted to do, we could put some resources on it. Right now, we have to prioritize and we have to decide what's most important. And that's one of them that's probably going to be further out.
How do we know about how long? Maybe like a year, 2 years. I know there's other projects already working on this, so hopefully they'll fill in the gaps. But do we know about time frame wise?
No,
Okay.
at this point, it's difficult to forecast out what our price is going to be next year, how much resources will be available. When you start talking about that far out, it's more of this is in a 3 to 5 year window or something like that. You can't forecast with that level of accuracy. And to be honest, priorities would change by then anyway. It may be moved up or back in the queue. So on items that are longer term like that, I think we'll just put it in a placeholder and say this is on the roadmap for long term, and we will pull items off of that roadmap, as we approach and need to prioritize that list. I really think that it is, it would be foolhardy to try to tag dates to that type of thing that's way further out. Of course, if the masternodes want to fund something like that and want to, spin up a separate team that could, pursue that, they're always free to do so. We by no means have a monopoly on development, and there are a number of other wallets that are created outside the core team. And so that is always something that could be worked on and voted on by the network. Personally, if I evaluate it, I don't see a strong value for Dash in pursuing that, and it would take a lot of resources. It is a very complicated thing to do. We've done some initial assessments of it. So it's both complex, very expensive to do, and it's questionable whether or not it would add a lot of value to the network.
I think it would. I think it would bring in more users. People are always wanting to get a little bit of return, and then the voting part as well. But one thing, if we expand Dash Boost more, people can have a vote. I've seen people complaining, well, they don't have a vote, they don't have enough from a masternode, but we do have Dash Boost, and hopefully that can grow bigger, and then everybody will have a vote.
People assume that these things are static, though, and when you make it easier for people to own a piece of the, call it become a shareholder, you're right, it does expand the pool and it does bring more people in. It also would increase the number of masternodes, which in turn would lower the returns for everyone else who owns a masternode today. And the network has an equilibrium, and that equilibrium is reached. If there are too few masternodes, some show up. If there are too many, some decide that they're going to sell out. And so we're kind of sitting at that equilibrium. So what ends up happening is if you do make it easier for people to come in, there might be some net new masternodes, but with a dropping ROI, you might also see some masternodes leave the network. And so it may not even have much of an impact on price or on, but the main benefit I do see is one that you pointed out. A lot of people would be more likely to invest in Dash or to participate if they could get something, or if they could participate in that return process. And in so doing, you might take one large masternode holder today and replace him or her with, 100 people with smaller components, and so it might draw people in, get them to experience the benefits of Dash, get them to participate in the community, and so it might help the network expand in that way. It's a bit fuzzy though to be able to put anything concrete to that ahead of time, and that's what makes me a little more hesitant to say this is where our priority ought to be. I believe that if you create just a great user experience, people are going to use this anyway because it's a great user experience, not because they can get a 6 or 7% return on a smaller amount of Dash that they can put in. I think that I think we'll see, because we're ultimately going to do both, right? It's just a question of which one should we do first.
Yeah.
Joel, okay. Mark? Yeah, I've got questions. I thought we was going to take it in turns, so I'll jump in, then Joel, you can do the next one. So sure. Ryan, while we're talking about development, some exciting stuff happened recently with the research scaling paper by ASU, which was funded by Dash and voted for
Yes.
by Dash, by the network. So how will Core be utilized in this recent scaling research paper from the ASU?
Well, a couple different ways. One is this, I want to point out to everybody, this was a tremendous value. We spent $50,000 on that partnership to fund the blockchain laboratory. And in return, we got access to enormous server farms that enabled us to model this. We got access to expertise in computer science that are specifically focusing their doctoral dissertation on scaling in decentralized networks. It doesn't get much better than that. So this was a tremendous value for the network, and it's a big benefit for ASU as well to be able to participate in a live network. The results of the research were basically the Dash network is super fast. It makes sense that it would be because we have incentivized nodes. They're running in high-speed, high-availability data centers, not somebody's desktop. And so what we learned is that the Dash network is incredibly well-suited for very large blocks. And in fact, with a couple of the technologies tested, they went up to 10 megabit blocks in their simulations and never reached a point at which the Dash network failed, where it began to fork or encounter performance issues. And so what we learned is that even the 2 megabit blocks that we put in place are incredibly conservative. Without changing our block type, we can easily move to 4 megabit blocks. Secondly, we learned that by including some new technologies here, like XThin or graphene, we can scale to numbers that are likely much larger than 10 megabyte blocks. And so we, I think, are going to pursue some research here next year that will explore graphene specifically and much larger block sizes. I think that there's been a lot of research around graphene. For those who don't know a lot about graphene, I encourage you to learn about it. It is really pushing the theoretical limits of how large traditional blocks can get without changing our architecture, without sharding the database or doing something else in order to reach scale. And so the implications are we can easily commit to use cases that approach Visa-like transaction levels without blinking an eye. And I think this really does away with the argument that blockchains can't scale. This is really the first research that's ever been done on the topic. It's one of the reasons we chose this as a topic area is because there's such scant research out there on blockchain scaling. When they did a survey of what areas or what research areas have been covered, there was a big gaping hole here. So, you know, this was really informative for us. It's going to allow us to make much better decisions on our network without breaking it. And I'm really encouraged by the results.
Yeah, I had the privilege of having Dr. Tapp and Nicole present right here in town on about an hour-long thing just on that paper and talk about all the different calculations they went through and talk about competing research and the gigablock testing for Bitcoin Cash and stuff. And yeah, top-notch team. They're really good. It's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, we're getting more deeply engaged in the research around some of these emerging technologies. Graphene, I am particularly excited about. The more we learn about it, the more it seems to be a very viable solution. So, you know, I think we're not going to move fast and break anything. But we are going to continue to pursue research in this area. And you know what? Even if we don't need the capacity today, if we make a commitment to this and make a commitment to scaling and demonstrate it by building things that are going to scale to much larger numbers, I can tell you we're having conversations with use cases where this is a concern, and they're coming to us and saying, how do we know that 2 years from now, 3 years from now, the capacity is going to be there for my growing business? And we're able to look them straight in the eye and say, here's proof. We're investing in this, and we're finding that we can scale to much larger numbers. And not only is this talk, we're actually going to do it. And so when we roll this out to the network at some point in the future, it's an incredible signaling to the marketplace that we're serious about this. And I think it can help attract new use cases to our network.
Yeah, we're running kind of short on time. One of the more important questions was about the SEC and if we're getting any kind of clarification in regards to Dash.
Yes, so I will have more announcements on this on the quarterly call. But what I can tell you is that we have engaged a firm in DC and performed extensive research on our status as a security or non-security. We did this research without knowing if we would proactively approach the SEC with the findings. And the findings that came back are incredibly strong that we are not a security. And when I say incredibly strong, there is almost no chance that anyone could evaluate our network from a legal perspective and determine that we are. Armed with that information, and it's probably like a 30-page document that goes into, legal precedents around this, specific legal arguments around different aspects of our network. Armed with this, we have informally approached the SEC. The SEC has graciously agreed to go through an evaluation and a no action letter process. We have not yet formally started that process. The SEC has asked a number of questions after the initial presentation. None of the questions are gotchas, they're clarifications. I know the answers to them, and I know that what they're looking for, we can easily address. And so I think that we will get an outcome there that we're looking for. I'm very hopeful. I believe we would be the first network to actually formally request a no action letter. I know that they've made a statement on Ethereum at this point, but I don't think that was in response to a specific request. So I'll be talking more about that process. Now, it will require some funding in order to support that process. I think if we were to get a no action letter, it would have an immediate impact on business partnerships, on exchanges that are willing to list us here in the United States, and a number of other different benefits, including just some assurances to the market. And I believe that it would have a tremendous impact. So I think that it would be foolish of us not to go through the process. There are stopgaps in place. If at any point we feel like things are going off the rail or they're headed in a direction we don't like, we can always withdraw the formal request for a ruling. So it's actually a very low risk process to go through. And having gone through the legal arguments at this point and having reviewed them myself, I view this as a no-brainer. I think we should do it. And so, when the timing is right, I think we'll be coming to the network with a proposal.
While we're on regulations, sorry to just jump in there. I think this is really important to get in. How do you feel about private send, and how is Dash going to solve the challenge in Japan, as this is kind of in that area as well?
Yeah. So private send, I think, labeled us very early on as a privacy-centric coin, And a lot of entities and including governments lump all privacy coins together in one, and they treat all of those different technologies and different approaches to privacy the same. That obviously isn't something that's going to last long term. At the end of the day, there are different technologies out there that range from fully obscuring everything about the transaction to something like PrivateSend that essentially obscures balances, but you can see the transactions happening on the blockchain. You can actually see when a transaction is obscured versus when it is not, and you can incorporate that into your risk scoring model. You can see when a payment is made to a specific address. It only obscures who the sender is. It doesn't obscure the recipient. So there are a lot of things about our privacy features that just aren't the same as others. And I think to look at a list of, quote, privacy-centric coins and treat them all identically it's not going to hold long term. When you look at Dash from a legal perspective, it is exactly identical to Bitcoin. In fact, you could do a PrivateSend transaction on the Bitcoin network. You can, create a list of inputs and outputs that are a certain denomination and send them all to addresses that are all brand new, never before seen addresses on the block. Do that several times. Be able to tie back an originating address to an end address. Dash has just made it slightly, substantially easier and more convenient and cost effective to do that. It's pretty difficult to point to a totally transparent blockchain like Bitcoin or Dash. The blockchain itself is totally transparent. You can see every single transaction, inputs, outputs, audit it yourself. From a legal standpoint, those two protocols are identical. And so from a legal standpoint, we should be treated identically. I just don't think the regulators understand that yet. Yeah. Now, Japan specifically, they are about to go through a change at the head of the FSA. And so we'll see if the new administration treats it any differently. If that weren't happening, I would probably go and attempt to address this directly. But given that they're about to go through a change, I'm not sure I want to expend legal expenses or other things when whoever's coming in may treat this totally differently. And so I think we're taking a wait and see approach. Right now, Japan is not a critical market for us. It's not a large one. We don't see a lot of activity there. We don't have a large community there. We're not really losing anything at this point in time. And we had no immediate plans to enter Japan in force. Now, if an opportunity comes up with an exchange that is a specific opportunity that may or may not occur as a result of this, yes, then it would make more sense to pursue it now. But I think it makes sense to wait a few months, see what the new JFSA does. And if they take a similar approach to this, then we can go forward with some legal arguments and try to persuade them. The real danger here is that this becomes a trend and others start copying the JFSA. That's not the way things tend to go in the real world. They tend to copy what the SEC and regulators in the United States do and how they treat it. And so I'm more concerned about what happens here. So far, New York has taken a pragmatic approach to this. They have allowed Gemini to include Zcash, which has much higher degrees of anonymity than our own network does. So, I think there's a recognition of regulators, most regulators, that privacy is something that consumers need and that is a consumer protection issue. And at the end of the day, that is their job, consumer protection. And so I believe that that there is plenty of room here for PrivateSend to exist, but it may require us to do a lot more education and lobbying in order to see it accepted.
Do we still have a partnership with CoinFirm, or is it like just for external people or to, partner with them, or?
Yeah, I refer people to CoinFirm all the time. They provide services on the Dash network. I don't have their customer list. I don't know who they work with, but they're one of the service providers. BlockCypher is also working with Blockchain Intel on a service, and their service has some unique features that aren't even available with the services on Bitcoin's network. So if you're in the money services business, the Dash, and you are subject to compliance and regulatory, compliance issues, we have services on our network that you can integrate Dash. You can, hire these services, implement risk scoring, and do all the things you need to do to be compliant. So, private send is not something we should walk away from. We should have principles around this, and there is a precedent in place that this can be worked out with the regulators. It's already happened with New York. I think JFSA is taking a very naive approach to, just looking at a list of, quote, privacy-centric coins and treating them all the same. When our protocol is identical to Bitcoin, you can't legally treat one of us one way and the other one a different way. So, I think it'd be interesting. We should put a bounty out there for someone to mine private send transactions into the Bitcoin blockchain, and then we can put them side by side and say, okay, here's a transaction on Bitcoin, here's a transaction on Dash. Prove to me why we should be treated differently. And I think that's a pretty powerful legal argument. So the only issue with private send transactions is they carry no fee, and it's really hard to get a no fee transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. But miners are allowed to do it, and they do zero fee transactions for themselves all the time. So, we could simply request a miner to incorporate these and pay them a bounty for doing it. I think it would be an interesting exercise to go through.
Will there be a Dash conference this year?
Yeah, so we've talked about the Dash conference, and up till now, Fernando's focus has been on all the other conferences that we're participating in this year, taking us up through Money 2020 at the end of October. I think that we should hold a Dash conference within the next 6-7 months. I'm not sure it will actually be this calendar year. I think it's subject to a lot of different things. I'd really like to try and line it up with, something related to evolution. And when the roadmap gets published, I think that we'll have a lot more clarity. I think the issue might be with everything else we have going on in, September, October, and then you start to get into the holidays. Is that the best time to hold it? Are we going to get the best attendance? I think there's a lot of considerations. We haven't made an announcement about when we plan to hold the next Dash conference. I would expect no later than very early 2019. Just in terms of getting the best attendance and having the most excitement and things to go over, it might need to wait until after the holidays.
Do you have any plans for the release of Evolution? Like, are you going to do like a Apple-style keynote speech to say, like, here it is? Or is it going to be like every other kind of like wallet update? Have you got any plans? Can you reveal it? You must have thought about it, surely.
Any air horns distributed?
Yeah. This is not just another release. And so I think that we need to do something special, whether that is announce at a specific event, and that could be a Dash specific event, or it could be a cryptocurrency specific event, or it could be a money services business specific event. I think it is going to be big news, regardless of which of those types of events you're talking about. And I believe we would have absolutely no trouble getting on any stage we wanted when we're ready to reveal that. It's really the biggest thing that's been released in Dash's history. I can't think of anything else that's as big. The governance system, the instant transactions, private send, all of those things pale in comparison to, I think, what Evolution will be for us. And so, I think it will be something big. The question is, what will it line up well with, and what type of opportunity do we have to speak about it? And so, in addition, I think that we will hit the ground with a large marketing campaign at the same time. I think we will finally consider ourselves post-product with a real consumer-facing, service that everyday people can use. And when you have that, I think that's when your marketing dollars go a lot further. And so I think we should celebrate internally and externally that evolution is here.
Is there any updates on Dash Labs? Do you know what's going on over there?
So Dash Labs is funded by and run by Evan. He's doing it out of his own pocket. Dash Labs, I think initially was focused a lot on hardware-based scaling, basically creating the equivalent of ASICs for block propagation and validation. I think as we've gotten into research and determined that there are no immediate needs for that, that this can all be solved with software for the foreseeable future, the urgency around that, or at least the importance around it, has diminished. And Dash Labs has focused a lot more on a lot of experimental type of technologies. I don't think there's anything that Evan wants to release publicly, or is at a stage where he wants to reveal specifically what he's working on. Evan always, I think, kind of works in, feels most comfortable working in the 3 to 5 year window, maybe even 10 years out of what this stuff could evolve into. So a lot of it is very theoretical. There aren't necessarily direct paths towards integrating some of those things, but he's a fascinating person. He has an incredible mind, and it is always good to talk with him about the things that he's working on and thinking about, and honestly poke holes in what he's thinking about and have him go back to the drawing board. But I don't think there's any immediate outputs from Dash Labs right now. And I think it would be interesting to have Evan on and be able to talk about some of the things that he's most interested in. If he'd be willing to come on. Honestly, I haven't had the conversation with him about, well, hey, how much of this can I talk about or not talk about, and how much of this is pre-idea versus real idea, so there's nothing that I can share, but he's got a couple of employees that are working with him, and doing all kinds of analyses and proof of concepts and testing, and I think he views it as a sandbox in which to develop new technologies.
Yeah, we've had a lot more transactions. I don't know who. Maybe that's Evan.
Who knows?
Yeah, we've seen an uptick in transactions, pretty substantial. I think we just had a record number of transactions last quarter. I haven't verified that yet, but just visually, it looks like that is the case. And I know of several use cases that are seeing a substantial number of transactions. We've seen BlockCypher's transaction counts about double. What's interesting is that the number of small value transactions has gone up, and the median transaction size has fallen to somewhere around $5. And so it appears to be more in line with purchases, not movements between exchanges. These are like actual economic activity occurring on the network. And what else is interesting about it is that it stands in contrast to the rest of the networks in the space. You look at the transaction counts on other networks, they're highly correlated with price. It seems to be primarily traders or movements between exchanges, these types of activities that are occurring on these networks. You look at our closest competitors, which are probably like Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, which are kind of facilitating that same low cost relatively quick transaction times, and their transaction costs or transaction counts have been dropping. And in fact, we surpassed them, I think, last month in transaction costs.
In June the 23rd, Dash transactions was higher than Bitcoin Cash and Monero combined on that one day.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we see surges too around this stuff. So what is also interesting is that the network fees continue to stay lower than any of those networks by a substantial margin. The median transaction fee was 0.05 cents on our network, even when we were seeing record transaction counts. And so I think it speaks to the architecture that we have in place. The fact that the incentivized nodes are there very clearly is making our network much, much faster at block propagation than any other network out there. And I believe that what we're seeing is real use and adoption. And so, yeah, I think it's exciting. I think that, it is mind-boggling to me that real usage continues to climb and prices continue to do what they've done. And the altcoin market has been particularly hard hit in this retracement. It's more than a retracement. It's a serious, drop in price that we've seen. When you look at Bitcoin, it's held up fairly well. And I see a lot of people comparing us to Bitcoin and saying, well, you're not performing as well as the market. Well, look at what's happened to some of these other coins in the last month. Most of them are down 30+% over the last 30 days. We're down 22. And I think the only coins that have performed better are Ethereum and Bitcoin. And, I think that I think at some point, this disjointment between our adoption and price has to start to converge, because it just doesn't make sense that, we continue to grow while the market moves against us. So I think, I don't want to discount what's happened with the price. There's clearly an issue here, and we can do more to communicate our value and the fact that we are growing, and communicate with investors, which I've started to do around what our value proposition is, about what our prospects are, et cetera. But it's really difficult when the market itself is down 35% or so over the last month.
Yeah, well, clearly it hasn't slowed adoption in some spots. Like Venezuela is almost 400 Dash accepting businesses as of today that we know of.
It's incredible.
And also about those transactions, there is some of the team there have created something called Dash Text, which is an SMS-based Dash wallet that does use BlockCypher. And so that would explain a big transaction count in both the lowering the median transaction value as well as the doubling of BlockCypher transactions.
Well, we're doing a better job too of measuring the outcomes associated with the promotions that we do. So Dash Core Group has, as part of our partnerships, we don't just pay for the integration. We also, provide some type of switching incentive for the customer to try Dash over Bitcoin or something like that. And so when we run promotions like we did with Pico at the beginning of the year, now Pico had already, they were accustomed to using, turn Dash on, I'll be honest, nobody started using it. BlockCypher saw almost no transactions. But we had a promotion set in place that, something like 2 weeks after we integrated, the promotion was announced and the integration itself was announced. And we saw a huge spike in the number of transactions hitting the network as people redeemed those. And our big question was, what happens when this redemption period runs out? Are they all going to go back to using Bitcoin? And the answer was no. And in fact, they kept topping up their phone services at about the same rate, even after the promotion went away. And so what we find is we run a promotion, we get people to try Dash, they use it, they realize, holy crap, this is a much better experience. The fees are lower. The transaction times are fast. Like, this is great. And they stick with us. And so I think that you have to be able to measure in order to determine what's working and what's not. As a result, we've gone out and done other promotions, and we've seen similar trends. And part of our contracts now is you will report to us what the outcomes are of this, that we can have visibility into how our promotion dollars are spent. And so I think we're doing a better job at figuring out what triggers people to try it and what types of experiences cause them to actually switch. And so I think that we're doing a lot of the right moves to get people to try it, use it, and become an evangelist themselves.
Yeah, one thing. So I bought this with Dash this morning, and the AnyPay point of sale system has a Dash back function that sends an extra bit of Dash back to your change address. So the Treasury is kind of incentivizing that, and what they've noticed is across the AnyPay point of sale system, which has long been taking Bitcoin and a bunch of others, Dash is about 85+% of all transactions now. So hey, wow, it works.
That's incredible.
Right, yeah. Brian, how are you doing for time? Because I know.
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I got one that's been coming for a while. So a lot of people in the community and the masternodes, etc., seem to have the constant complaint about communication, and it's sort of hard to sometimes pin down exactly what that means, because obviously someone can always complain and say, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, but without pinning down exactly what is not liked and what could be done to improve. So the one thing that seems to be a sticking point, because obviously I deal with listening to people all day long and talking to community members all day long, it seems like there's been a little bit of a worry on, say something's announced, it's like, we'll have Evolution ready here, or this release will be done here, or we'll do this in about a couple of weeks time or a month's time. And then after that time frame is kind of reached, nothing happens and there is no update prior to the fact or at the fact of, hey, we're running behind schedule, it might be another month or whatever. And I haven't had that extensive of a experience in the professional world, but from my time that I have been, I know it's been a little bit, it's hard to keep your job when you tell your bosses, we don't tell your bosses how you're doing on your work. You say like, hey, how's it been going? I won't tell you. Eventually it's just like, oh, you're out the door.
Look, it's fair criticism. It is fair criticism. And we did in Q2 announce several dates, either directly or through our management meeting notes that we released to the public, that certain things were going to happen by certain times. And just as an example, 12.3, we thought we were a couple weeks out, and then testnet issues cropped up where testnet was not updated. People were participating in testnet that were not updating their nodes. The network was forking and not working properly. We couldn't test. It took a ton of man hours and effort to get that cleaned up, get a new testnet set up, and get the misbehaving nodes kicked out, and all of these types of things. It was an issue we didn't anticipate. We never went back and explained what was happening there, why it was happening, why we couldn't test. I think that we should have done a better job there. I think there were it was well intentioned in communicating it. It's always well intentioned in communicating what we anticipate dates being. And it was well intentioned when people jumped in and started solving the problem, as opposed to focusing on the communication part. What we need to do a better job at is circling back to anything that was publicly released and addressing it, explaining any delays. We owe that to the community. Now, we probably depend a bit too much on the quarterly calls to give full updates. And outside of that, we are, publishing our bi-weekly management meetings with some redaction where it's needed in areas like business development, where we can't pre-announce a partnership or something like that. But we're trying to be very transparent about it. But the criticism is fair, and it's one of the things that Bob has taken very seriously in his first weeks here, is understanding that history and what went wrong, why the community is upset about the lack of updates on the roadmap, all of these things. And he knows the importance of it and is taking it very seriously. So I wouldn't expect the status quo to remain. I really think that it's important that we do a better job. And Bob thinks it's really important that we do a better job there. I would say give Bob a few weeks to finish off the internal commitments that he needs to hear. And I think that we'll have a much more transparent roadmap going forward. It's our intention as a team, we've discussed it as a team, to make sure that that is very transparent. If you're going to start doing that and you're going to start sticking to it, it also means that you need to not have this published by one person who thinks that that's what the roadmap is. You need that internal alignment and a complete agreement that we're sticking to this. And that's the process that we've been going through for, honestly, the last couple of months. And agreeing on what is absolutely necessary versus nice to haves and that type of thing. And so it's something that, as we brought in new leadership, it's really been an area that we're focusing on. And, I think subsequent to the quarterly call, my expectation is that won't happen anymore.
Well, we just had a comment in the live chat suggesting that this has been really great and informative. But they were saying, would you be willing to come on the podcast once a month to do like a Ask Me Anything live Q&A, where we take questions, I guess, from the community again, or perhaps yourself or Bob? Question is there going to be enough unique questions each month for you? I'm guessing yes.
Think so. This is my favorite subject to talk on, so of course I could talk forever about Dash,
I would like to be able to do more of these, and my life is approaching a point where I will be able to do more of these. At this time last year, I had inherited unexpectedly business development. I still had all of the financial responsibilities. On top of that, trying to get Dash Core Group set up. On top of that, dealing with just the day-to-day. Time just didn't allow for it. As we went through the last year and onboarded some of these executives, first Bradley, then Glenn, now Bob, and I'm getting more and more transition to those people and those roles and teams built up. I believe that my time should shift more towards externally facing. I have done a lot more in the last month. I actually spent a couple of weeks up in New York, meeting with investors, meeting with, going and doing presentations at conferences, consulting firms, a number of different, entities that I've done some externally facing things with. I've committed to, I believe, 3 or 4 new conferences in the next few months. I'm doing this podcast. My intention is absolutely to do more of this and, communicate much more effectively what it is that we're doing to deliver. Because I can start to do this. It's not that I didn't want to be doing this earlier, but it was a matter of prioritizing the team structure and getting everything set up and effective. That took up all of my time.
Yeah, communication's definitely improved here in the last, few months. It's maybe kind of fallen off a little bit here lately, but overall, I'm very impressed with the communication. Is the team gonna?
Alexander
We're not
Block,
done.
I like his written communication's really good.
Yeah, I mean, that gives some transparency into some of the stuff that we're working on for the longer term. We've done the demos as well towards the beginning of the year of the evolution components. We've published DIPs that were previously unpublishable because the provisional patents were not yet filed. So it's not that we didn't recognize that communication was an issue. We recognized it. We started to do things early in the year. We've continued to ramp it up. And as our capacity continues to grow, I'm planning on doing more. So Bob plans on engaging with the community. We've had discussions around it. He's still, getting his feet underneath him, but I would anticipate that would start soon. I think the community will be impressed with his capabilities and knowledge and management expertise. So, I really think that it's going to get better from here. If I were in the community, I would be a bit impatient as well. I would be in the same boat, and so we're aware of it, and I'm taking personal responsibility to do more of it.
Has the core team expansion peaked? Is it, as we got all the people in place now, and also is the Arizona office, is it going to see more people, or how's that going?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the size of the team, I think it's leveling off. I don't know that it's peaked, but we certainly have most of the resources in place that we need to deliver on the immediate future. There are some areas that I would like to see ramp up. I think because of budget constraints right now, we're a little uncomfortable adding to the team in places like marketing. Fernando is working his tail off on a number of different things, everything from the website to the conferences that we have coming up, to the marketing budget that we do have, and a number of other initiatives. It's way more than one person should reasonably be expected to handle. At the same time, he's willing to say, hey, do we really need to commit to another resource right now? The answer to that may be no. And so I think there's a few areas, particularly on the business side, that could definitely benefit from some more resources, much more so than the developer side, where we have a few holes to fill. There's always somebody, in a team that size that's leaving. So I think we have some backfill on occasion to do. But I think it's leveling off. In terms of Arizona and our presence here, it has increased lately. We for a while it was myself, Kelly, head of HR, Alex, the head of strategy, and that was pretty well it. Lately, we've added 3 interns from Arizona State University, including Nakul, who we talked about earlier. We've got a recruiter that we just hired, transitioned to a new recruiter that's based here in Scott. We've added recently. Bradley actually has family here in Arizona, so he's here a couple, 2-3 months out of the year, just to allow us to connect in person and work on the more strategic type stuff. And so it is turning into a real office. It's not a ghost town the way that it used to be. And we're holding more and more meetings here with external parties. Arizona State University, I've met with a couple of deans here in the office. And so, I think it is a great location to have. It helps us partner with Arizona State to be an affiliate of the program here, and that's here at SkySong, and it's instrumental for a lot of the meetings that we do hold. So I don't know what Bob's intentions are in terms of hiring technical roles here, but right now it's mainly been on the more the business end of things that we've got roles here at the moment, and it definitely affects our productivity. When you're in the same time zone and you're in a physical proximity to each other, and you can just poke your head outside the door and say, hey, can you come take a look at this? You can get on the whiteboard together. It is more effective. And so I think it's a location that we should try to leverage more. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be our only location. At the end of the day, we have customers in every time zone, and it may behoove us at some point to start, creating Dash offices in other locations. Like, we've got some folks in Switzerland. Might it make sense to create an office there? We seem to have several team members in Hong Kong. Might that be our East Asia, type of operation? So I think that these offices have a lot of benefit, way more than their cost. And so I think that that we should be looking to co-locate where it makes sense. On the other hand, with developers, we will take top quality talent wherever it is. Someone like Codablock, who has cryptography knowledge and deep knowledge of our code base, and is incredibly knowledgeable and productive. That's the type of guy you're going to take him no matter where he comes to you from. And so I think we need room for both. And I think it's really up to those managers to decide what is the best model for them.
I think we should give a shout out to Codablock as well. He's been supporting you, Ryan, in the live chat, especially on the Masternode shares, talking about dip free and external people coming in and 12.4. So thanks, Codablock, for manning the live chat. Much appreciated. Hello to you.
Thanks for the support.
Yeah, well, he's validated everything that you said as well, so that's really handy. So from both sides, but just for the people that will be listening to this podcast and not being able to see the live chat. Okay, so maybe one or two more questions. I think we should think about wrapping up. This question was actually upvoted the most in the Masternode Only channel on Discord via emojis. What else? It's a bit long-winded.
Currency of our time.
Yeah, it's a bit long-winded, so please bear with me. Okay, question for Ryan. Dash is aiming to bring cryptocurrencies to the masses. To do this, people will need to favor cryptocurrencies over traditional currencies, but more so, Dash has to stand out among all other cryptocurrencies. So far, there isn't really much incentive for most people to use Dash over something like Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin, and less opportunity to spend any cryptocurrency over fiat. Private send is hardly being used, and merchants and payment processors are allowing instant purchases, i.e. Brisbane Airport, without the need for something like instant send. Two Dash features that once used to differentiate Dash against other cryptos. So, in the future, what will make everyday people choose Dash over other crypto and ultimately over fiat? And will Dash be able to implement those things faster than the competition?
Wow, lengthy indeed.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So the crux of this one is, what is going to differentiate us? How are we going to position ourselves on the market, and in such a way that people would choose us over the alternatives? And I think the answer is what we have been touting all along with evolution, which is usability really is the issue. I gave a speech on this back in early 2016, and it was really my introduction to the Dash community, because I largely had been working behind the scenes with Evan up until that point. And in this speech, I talked a bit about what other companies in other industries that have focused on usability have achieved. And it is undeniable that companies that focus on usability and making that user experience great outperform the rest of the market. And this isn't just true in payments. This is true very widely across industries. And I put a slide up that included companies like Google, JetBlue, Netscape, a bunch of companies that focused very early on the user experience, and then compared that to how did that end up 10 years later. And the time frame in question in which these 10 companies were selected before anything else happened, this is not in retrospect, this was a company that had evaluated companies in the Fortune 500 and said which ones focus on user experience. And their hypothesis was that they would outperform over the following decade. And they picked these companies at a time when Netflix was strictly through the mail on DVDs, when Google didn't have Google Maps. It didn't have any of the services that we use. So I think, you know, it was looking at it as who just focuses on the user experience and what were the results. And the results were incredible. They had like 400 times the return of the overall market over the following decade. Our hypothesis and our strategy is focused on exactly that. We have an infrastructure in place that allows us to do things that these other networks can't. Single-tier networks cannot effectively provide a Venmo-like experience without funneling that experience through a server. And so we have an infrastructure that can do things no other network can, and we're leveraging it. We're designing something, and it is a very extensible platform that will do much more than DashPay. DashPay is just the first decentralized application that will run on the Dash network. But we're talking to logistics companies. We're talking to you know, companies that want to actually build applications on top of the Dash network. We're talking to rideshare services. So with the power of this technology, we have an ability to create a differentiated user experience, and I believe that that differentiated user experience will lead to higher growth.
Yeah, I remember that presentation you did, and I agree that was probably my favorite. In fact, I might link the video to that presentation in the video description for us to watch, because you also spoke about PayPal as well and looked at strategies that they use to onboard people as well. And it's it's almost like a timeless presentation just because of the real world, real case examples that you gave. And I'd love to see more presentations from you like that in the future. I remember that really got the community going at the time. Right, Brian, do you have any more questions for Ryan?
I think we made it through. I think we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'd just like to thank Ryan for taking the time to come on. We really do appreciate it, and answering these questions blindly. We went to the Masternode Only channel to get these questions. So these questions were direct from the community, and I think it's been incredibly informative. And I know you're a very, very busy man. So thank you, Ryan, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, and I look forward to doing it again in the future. You know, I think that the more that I can start to do things like this, I think the more the entire community can be informed and aligned around what we're trying to do too. I think that the more consistent messaging that we can deliver to the market as a community, I think it's better for all of us as well. So, I look forward to doing it more often.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Well, myself and Brian will be retreating now to Discord, dashchat.org if you're new to Dash, and we'll have a after party that is open to 10 people, only 10 spaces available, where myself, a few master owners, some people from the community, and perhaps new people, perhaps viewing this, can join in, and we chat about everything from proposals to all things Dashy. So please feel free to come in and join in. By default, you'll be going to the Dash Chat channel and just say, hey, where's the after party at? I'll keep an eye out and I'll try and add you into that. So that was episode 59 of the Dash Force Free Amigos. Thank you to Ryan Taylor, Dashcourt Group CEO. Hopefully we can have him back on in a month or two and we can get some more questions from the community. I hope you found this to be informative. Have a great weekend, and most importantly, stay dashy.